Ezekiel, Zeke, Fisher woke to the gentle rocking of his boat, the wind chime. The weathered wooden vessel creaked beneath him, a comforting sound that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat over the decades spent at sea. Dawn was breaking over the vast horizon, painting the sky in watercolors of amber and rose. Zeke stretched, his joints protesting with familiar aches that spoke of years battling the elements. The small fishing village that reluctantly claimed him appeared in the distance, a cluster of modest homes perched precariously on the rocky coastline. Smoke from morning fires curled upward, dissolving into the pale sky. Zeke had ventured out the previous evening, spending the night on open water as he often did. The villagers called him eccentric. He preferred the term cautious. Bringing the wind chime around, Zeke navigated toward the weathered dock. His catch had been good, several large cod and a medium-sized squid that had found its way into his nets. The giant squid, his true quarry, had eluded him once again, but Zeke was nothing if not patient. Another night, talking to ghosts, Fisher, old Martin called from the pier as Zeke tied up his boat. "The ghosts are better company than most," Zeke replied with a half-smile, hefting his catch onto the dock. Martin shook his head, eyeing the haul. "Storm season's coming. You're going to find yourself in trouble one of these nights." Zeke merely nodded. Martin wasn't wrong. The air carried the metallic tang that preceded the great autumn storms, and the seabirds had been flying lower, seeking shelter. But the sea called to him in ways that land never could, and Zeke had long ago made peace with whatever fate awaited him on the water. "You hear about the Henderson boy?" Martin asked, helping Zeke sort through the fish. "Says he saw lights out beyond the northern reef. Strange ones, blue and pulsing. Not like any fishing vessel I've ever heard of." Zeke paused, interest piqued. "When was this?" "2 nights ago. And he's not the only one. Malcolm swears he saw something big moving beneath his boat last week." "Too big," he said. Zeke resumed his work, but his mind was turning. He'd noticed oddities himself, torn nets with clean edges no fish tooth could make, strange ripples in the water where no current should be, and twice in the past month, he'd heard a low, mechanical hum resonating through his hull that resembled no marine engine he knew. Probably just the military testing something, Zeke offered, though he didn't believe it himself. "Maybe." Martin sounded unconvinced. "People are spooked. 3 boats from Rockport Harbor haven't returned. Coast Guards found nothing." After dividing his catch, some for himself, some for the village stores as was tradition, Zeke retreated to his small cottage overlooking the bay. It was sparse but sufficient. A single room with a bed, a table, a shelf of books on marine biology, and a wall of equipment. Fishing tools, maps, weather instruments. The cottage's most prized feature was its wide window facing the sea, where Zeke could watch the water in all its moods. That night, unable to sleep, Zeke found himself back on the wind chime. The moon was a silver sliver, offering just enough light to navigate by. He headed toward the northern reef, where Henderson claimed to have seen the strange lights. The wind carried the scent of impending rain, but the storm wasn't upon them yet. There was time. Hours passed. Zeke fished absent-mindedly, his attention focused on the depths below rather than what might come up in his nets. Just after midnight, when the village lights had long disappeared behind him, he saw it. A faint blue glow beneath the water, moving in patterns no bioluminescent creature would make. Cutting his engine, Zeke drifted silently, heart pounding. The glow grew stronger, rising toward the surface about 50 yards from his boat. Then, in a moment that would forever divide his life into before and after, the sea erupted. A massive metallic shape breached the surface, water cascading from its sleek sides. It was enormous, easily 3 times the length of the wind chime, and unlike any submarine or ship Zeke had ever encountered. The object hovered momentarily, its surface illuminated with pulsing blue lights, before sinking back below the waves with barely a ripple. The displacement wave hit the wind chime seconds later, nearly capsizing it. Zeke grabbed the gunwale, pulling himself upright as water sluiced across the deck. By the time he had steadied himself, the sea had returned to normal. No lights, No enormous metal object, nothing to suggest he hadn't imagined the whole encounter. But Zeke Fisher knew what he had seen, and he knew it wasn't of this world, at least not the world as he understood it. The journey back to shore was tense, his eyes constantly scanning the water for any sign of the object's return. His mind raced with possibilities, each more fantastic than the last. Whatever he had witnessed, Zeke knew one thing with certainty. He would return tomorrow night, and the night after that, until he understood what lurked beneath the waves of his beloved ocean. Deep below the surface, inside the submerged vessel, Commander Renack stared at the monitoring screen with alarm. "We were seen," he stated flatly, his eyes fixed on the thermal image of a small boat retreating toward the shore. A human craft was directly above us during emergency surfacing. Chief Scientist Minali moved closer to the screen, her expression grave beneath the soft blue lighting of the command center. The cloaking system failure couldn't have come at a worse time. Do we know if the human actually saw us? The craft's sole occupant was on deck when we breached. Visual contact was almost certainly made. Renack's voice carried the weight of their mission protocols. This complicates everything. The Zarvan vessel, a marvel of technology designed for stealth observation, lay damaged on the seafloor. What should have been a routine study of Earth's giant squid migration patterns had turned disastrous when their ship had been attacked by one of the very creatures they were studying, a massive specimen that had been disturbed by their scanning equipment. "The High Council will demand immediate withdrawal," Minali said, running diagnostic checks on their damaged systems. "We violated the primary directive. Remain undetected by indigenous species." Renack pinched the bridge of his nose, a human gesture he'd unconsciously adopted during their long mission. "We can't withdraw. Not yet. The propulsion system needs at least 2 more days of repairs, and the storm approaching will only complicate matters." "Then what do you suggest?" Renack's gaze returned to the thermal image of the retreating boat. "We need to assess the witness. Determine the risk level. If necessary." He didn't finish the sentence, but Minali understood. Memory modification was an option of last resort, but it was an option nonetheless. "I'll prepare a surface team," Minali said, already moving toward the equipment chamber. That night, Zeke sat aboard the wind chime, nets prepared but mind elsewhere. The moon was hidden behind gathering clouds, and the air hung heavy with moisture. The perfect night for another encounter. He told no one about what he'd seen. Who would believe him? Strange lights and metal behemoths rising from the sea. He'd be labeled a drunk or a madman. Better to gather more evidence first, to understand what he was dealing with. Around midnight, as Zeke was adjusting his position, a soft splash from the port side caught his attention. Instinctively, he reached for the old harpoon he kept handy, a relic from his grandfather's whaling days that had never seen action under Zeke's ownership, but provided comfort nonetheless. 3 figures climbed aboard with silent efficiency. They wore form-fitting suits that seemed to absorb rather than reflect moonlight, and their faces were obscured by what looked like advanced diving masks. One was clearly female, the other 2 male, but beyond that, Zeke could discern little about his uninvited guests. "Stay back," Zeke warned, brandishing the harpoon and a powerful flashlight he'd grabbed from beside the wheel. The beam illuminated the intruders, who flinched as though unaccustomed to bright light. The tallest figure stepped forward cautiously, raising empty hands in a universal gesture of peace. No harm intended. The voice was male and carried a strange accent that Zeke couldn't place. "We come. Talk only." The female figure touched something on her wrist, and a small device emitted a brief, high-pitched sound. "That should help," she said, her speech now clearer though still accented. "We apologize for the intrusion, Fisherman. We mean you no harm." Zeke kept the harpoon raised. "You're from that thing I saw last night. The metal craft." The tall one nodded. "I am Renack, commander of the research vessel you observed. This is Chief Scientist Minali and Security Officer Turan." He gestured to his companions. "We are. Not from here." "No kidding," Zeke replied, eyes narrowing. "Military? Russian? Chinese?" A sound escaped Minali that might have been a laugh. "We come from much farther away than that, I'm afraid. We are researchers studying Earth's oceans. We've encountered difficulties. Our vessel is damaged and needs repairs. You're telling me you're aliens? Zeke asked bluntly, lowering the harpoon slightly. We prefer distant travelers, Renak replied. And we need your discretion. Our presence here must remain secret. Zeke considered them for a long moment. The rational part of his mind screamed that this was impossible, that he should alert authorities immediately. But another part, the part that had always been drawn to the sea's mysteries, was intrigued beyond measure. What do you want from me? He finally asked. Your silence, primarily, Renak said, and perhaps your assistance. We need to remain hidden while we complete repairs. In exchange, we can offer materials and technology to improve your vessel. Why should I trust you? Minali stepped forward. Because we could have taken you aboard our ship against your will last night when you saw us. Or we could have ensured you never reported what you saw through less pleasant means. Instead, we're requesting your help. It was a fair point. If these beings meant him harm, they'd had ample opportunity. And the prospect of understanding who, or what, they were was too tempting to dismiss. 2 conditions, Zeke said after a pause. You don't hurt anyone. Not me. Not the villagers, not anyone. And you tell me the truth about why you're really here. The 3 exchanged glances before Renak nodded. Agreed. We'll demonstrate our good faith. Would you like to see our vessel? Hours later, Zeke found himself staring in awe at the most advanced technology he'd ever encountered. The Zarvan ship, accessible through an ingeniously concealed airlock near the reef, was a marvel of engineering. Corridors of a metal Zeke couldn't identify led to chambers filled with equipment beyond his comprehension. The command center featured display screens showing detailed maps of the ocean floor, currents, and marine life movements with a precision that made human sonar look primitive by comparison. Zeke moved from station to station, asking questions that Minali answered with increasing enthusiasm. Your species fears the ocean, Zeke observed, watching a 3D rendering of a giant squid's migration pattern. That's why you're in this fortress instead of diving like human researchers would. Renak, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. Our ancestors were nearly eradicated by ocean predators on our homeworld. For generations, we avoided large bodies of water entirely, building our civilization inland. Only in recent centuries have we developed the technology to study oceans safely from within vessels like this one. So you came all this way to study our ocean because you're afraid of your own? Zeke asked incredulously. We came to study how Earth species have adapted to survive in what we consider extreme conditions, Minali explained. Your giant cephalopods are of particular interest. Similar species nearly destroyed our civilization before we retreated from the coasts. Understanding them might help us reclaim our oceans someday. If you're so afraid of the water, why come at all? Surely there are safer places to study. Minali smiled wistfully. To conquer fear, one must confront it. We gather data, record behaviors, analyze patterns, all to present to the Zarvan Council in hopes they'll support more extensive research. Their conversation was interrupted by a loud alarm. A nearby screen flashed red, displaying rapidly changing symbols Zeke couldn't decipher. Large biomass approaching. Renak translated, his voice tense. A pod of the giant cephalopods we've been tracking. They're coming this way, and our cloaking system is still offline. Zeke moved to the screen, studying the movement patterns. They're hunting, following the current where it carries smaller squid. He pointed to an area of the display. Your ship is directly in their path. We need to move. Taran spoke for the first time, his voice sharp with alarm. Now, the propulsion system isn't fully operational, Minali countered. We can only manage minimal movement. Zeke considered the situation. There's a sheltered bay about 2 miles south, deep enough for your vessel, surrounded by rock formations that would mask your presence from below. I can guide you there. Renak hesitated. You want us to follow your small wooden boat? I know these waters better than anyone, Zeke replied without boasting. I know the channels, the currents, the hidden rocks that don't appear on any chart. I can get you there safely. After a brief consultation, Renak nodded. Lead on, Fisherman. But we must hurry. The storm is approaching, and these creatures will not be far behind. As the wind chime cut through increasingly choppy waters, Zeke felt a strange exhilaration. Behind him, barely visible beneath the surface, the massive Zarvan ship followed like an obedient sea creature. The collaboration was unlikely, but somehow it felt right, as though his lifetime on these waters had been preparation for this moment. What neither Zeke nor his new allies realized was that the approaching storm was merely a prelude to the true danger lurking in the depths. The giant squid, agitated by the Zarvans scanning equipment and drawn to its energy signature, was gathering its pod for a confrontation that would test the limits of both human and alien technology and courage. The storm hit with unexpected fury, transforming the sea from an undulating surface into a chaotic battleground of towering waves and driving rain. Zeke stood at the helm of the wind chime, white-knuckled, hands gripping the wheel as he navigated through walls of water that threatened to swallow his vessel whole. Lightning split the sky, momentarily illuminating the turbulent seascape. In those brief flashes, Zeke caught glimpses of the Zarvan ship below, its sleek form struggling to maintain position as underwater currents buffeted it from all sides. The crackling voice of Renak came through the communication device they'd given him. "Fisherman, our stabilizers are failing. The primary propulsion system is offline." The commander's usually controlled voice carried an edge of panic. "We cannot maintain this course through such turbulence." "You have to," Zeke shouted back, wiping rain from his eyes. "Stay with me. I'll get us through." Zeke had weathered countless storms in these waters, but this one was exceptional. Nature's fury amplified to a deafening crescendo. The wind chime crested a massive wave, momentarily becoming airborne before crashing down into the trough beyond. The impact jarred Zeke's bones, but the old boat held together. "We can't fight the current head-on," Zeke instructed, adjusting his course. "We need to work with it, ride the wave patterns. Can you detect the undertow pulse?" There was a pause before Manali's voice responded. "Yes, our sensors can map it, but our navigation system isn't programmed for these conditions." "Then follow my lead precisely." Zeke began calling out directions, using the knowledge etched into his soul by decades on the water. The Zarvan crew complied, their advanced technology now dependent on the intuition of a single human fisherman. Gradually, they established a rhythm, Zeke anticipating each wave pattern, the Zarvan ship responding to his guidance. Together, they inched closer to the protective embrace of the bay. Just as they approached the bay's entrance, when it seemed they might actually survive the storm's wrath, disaster struck. The wind chime lurched violently, nearly capsizing as something massive grabbed its hull from below. In the beam of his emergency light, Zeke saw it. A glistening, mottled tentacle thicker than his torso wrapped around the boat's midsection. The wood creaked dangerously under the pressure. "Kraken," he shouted into the communicator. "We're under attack." Aboard the Zarvan vessel, alarms blared as more tentacles emerged from the depths to engulf the ship. The creature, or creatures, had found them. Through the viewing screen, Renak and Minali watched in horror as their worst fears materialized in the form of an enormous cephalopod, its body as large as a small building, eyes the size of dinner plates glowing with predatory intelligence. "Activate defensive measures," Renak commanded, but the damage report flashed across the screen, displaying critical failures across multiple systems. "Weapons offline," Taran reported, panic evident in his voice. Hull integrity at 70% and dropping. Above them, Zeke was fighting his own battle. The tentacle tightened around the wind chime, threatening to snap the vessel in two. Acting on instinct born from years of handling dangerous catches, Zeke grabbed a specialized gaffing hook, one coated with a mixture of chili oil and crushed shells that local fishermen use to deter aggressive marine life. He jammed the barbed end deep into the fleshy appendage, dragging it through the sensitive tissue. The tentacle spasmed, its grip loosening just enough for Zeke to maneuver toward the section still attached to the boat. From a compartment beneath the deck, He retrieved a flask of pungent liquid, a homemade repellent concocted from fermented fish oil and bitter herbs. Zeke poured the noxious substance directly onto the tentacle where it met the hull. The reaction was immediate. The appendage recoiled as if burned, releasing the wind chime with a powerful splash. "Reenact!" Zeke shouted into the communicator. "The creature is sensitive to certain chemicals. Do you have anything aboard that might irritate its nervous system? Something that creates vibrations or sonic disturbances?" Through the static, Manali's voice responded. "We have sonic pulse emitters designed for research, not defense. But if recalibrated, do it," Zeke ordered, already preparing his next move. "I'll distract it from above. When I give the signal, hit it with everything you've got." What followed was a desperate, improvised assault. Zeke attached a small emergency flare to the end of his grandfather's harpoon. When the creature's massive eye broke the surface, tracking the movement of the Zarvan ship, Zeke took aim. The flare-tipped harpoon struck true, embedding itself in the gelatinous tissue surrounding the giant eye. The squid thrashed in agony as the flare ignited underwater, its harsh chemical light burning into the sensitive organ adapted for the darkness of the deep. "Now!" Zeke shouted into the communicator. Beneath the waves, Manali activated the modified sonic pulse emitter. The water itself seemed to vibrate as concentric waves of sound energy pulsed outward from the Zarvan ship. The frequency, specifically calibrated to disrupt cephalopod nervous systems, sent the creature into confused spasms. Between the burning flare and the disorienting sonic attack, the giant squid finally retreated, its massive form disappearing into the depths with surprising speed for something so large. The water churned in its wake, gradually settling as both human and alien vessels limped toward the shelter of the bay. By the time they reached the protected waters, both crafts were severely damaged. The wind chime had a gaping hole in its port side where the tentacle had crushed the planking, and Zeke himself sported a deep gash across his shoulder from being thrown against the wheel. The Zarvan ship fared little better. Its outer hull showed multiple breach points, and several critical systems were offline. As they settled in the relative calm of the bay, a somber mood descended over both crews. "That was unexpected," Reenact admitted, his voice conveying both relief and newfound respect as he helped Zeke bandage his wounded shoulder aboard the Zarvan vessel. "On our world, no one would have survived such an encounter." Zeke shrugged, then winced at the pain the movement caused. "The sea has risks every day. You learn to adapt, or you don't come home. You faced that creature with nothing but primitive tools and succeeded where our technology failed." Manali marveled, analyzing tissue samples collected from the tentacle residue on the wind chime's hull. "Not primitive," Zeke corrected. "Appropriate. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective." Reenact studied the human with growing respect. Perhaps these Earth dwellers weren't as helpless against the ocean's terrors as the Zarvan had always assumed. Later that night, as repairs began on both vessels, a transmission arrived from the Zarvan High Council. Reenact and Manali reviewed it in private, their expressions growing increasingly troubled as they read. "They're ordering immediate withdrawal," Reenact summarized, his voice tight. "We're to complete minimum repairs and leave Earth orbit as soon as possible. Any human witnesses are to have their memories modified before our departure." "Zeke saved us," Manali protested. "We owe him more than mind manipulation." "Orders are orders," Reenact replied, though his tone lacked conviction. The fisherman had shown courage and resourcefulness that had earned Reenact's respect, qualities he'd been taught humans lacked when facing oceanic dangers. The dilemma weighed heavily on him as he joined Zeke on the rocky shore that evening. The human had built a small fire and was cooking fish over the flames, the simple meal somehow appealing after days of synthesized Zarvan nutrition. "Join me," Zeke offered, gesturing to a smooth rock across the fire. "It's nothing fancy, but it's fresh." Reenact settled onto the makeshift seat, accepting a portion of the grilled fish with cautious curiosity. Manali arrived moments later, completing their unlikely gathering. As they ate, Zeke shared stories of his life at sea, the tranquil dawns, the violent storms, the years of solitude following the loss of his family to a particularly vicious hurricane. After they were gone, I stopped fearing the sea, he explained, gazing into the flames. Fear serves no purpose when you've lost everything. The ocean became my companion instead, unpredictable, sometimes cruel, but honest in its way. In turn, Minali spoke of Zarvan history, how their ancient ancestors have been systematically hunted by massive ocean predators until they abandoned their coastal cities entirely, retreating inland to rebuild their civilization with backs turned firmly to the waters that had nearly destroyed them. For millennia, we developed technology instead of sailing skills, aerospace instead of marine exploration, she explained. Only in recent generations have we begun to study oceans again, and always from within the safety of vessels like ours. As the night deepened and the fire burned low, a bond formed between the three, representatives of different worlds united by their relationship with the sea. Renak found himself reconsidering the council's orders. Could he really erase this human's memories after all they'd shared? The decision was postponed when Minali's portable scanner began emitting a high-pitched alert. She studied the readings with growing alarm. "The squid, it's not alone," she announced, showing them the display. "Our sonar has detected an entire colony in a cave system beneath the bay. Dozens of specimens, some even larger than the one that attacked us. That explains the disappearances," Zeke mused. "Fishing boats vanishing without distress calls." Renak's immediate instinct was to leave, complete repairs and depart before encountering more of the creatures. But Zeke shook his head. "If you leave them here, they'll continue hunting in these waters. More people will die," the fisherman argued. "These aren't normal squid. Something's different about them. They're more aggressive, more coordinated than any cephalopods I've encountered." "What do you suggest?" Renak asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "We need to drive them away from the populated coastline," Zeke replied. "Force them to migrate to deeper waters where they won't encounter humans." Minali considered this, then offered a solution. "We have bioacoustic disruptors, devices designed to study marine life communication. With modifications, they could generate frequencies that would be unbearable for these creatures, essentially creating a sonic barrier they wouldn't cross. But someone would need to place the devices at specific points in the cave system," Renak pointed out. "It would require direct contact with the creatures in their own territory." "I'll do it," Zeke volunteered without hesitation. "I know these waters, and I've dived these caves before. With some of your equipment to help me breathe and see, I can place your devices." Renak shook his head. "It's too dangerous. My crew would panic underwater," Zeke finished for him. "No offense, Commander, but your people fear the ocean too much. Fear leads to mistakes. Mistakes underwater are fatal." The truth of Zeke's words hung between them. Finally, Renak nodded. "I'll accompany you. Two have better chances than one, and I've had more underwater training than most Zarvan." As dawn approached, they set about preparing for the mission. The Zarvan provided materials to patch the wind chime, while Zeke fashioned new hunting tools, including specialized spears designed to work with the Zarvan sonic technology. Throughout the day, Renak wrestled with the Council's order regarding Zeke's memories. Minali found him staring at the memory modification device, his expression troubled. "You're considering disobeying orders," she observed. Not a question, but a statement. "This human has shown us more about courage than centuries of Zarvan research," Renak replied. "Is it right to take that from him? To make him forget his own heroism? The Council fears human knowledge of our existence. Perhaps that fear is as misplaced as our fear of oceans," Renak countered. "Perhaps we have more to learn from them than they from us." Before Minali could respond, an urgent alert sounded from the ship's monitoring system. The squid colony was on the move, beginning to migrate from the caves. Their window of opportunity was closing fast. Dawn painted the sky in shades of fire as Zeke, Renak, and Minali set out for the cave entrance. The storm had passed, leaving behind a deceptive calm that did nothing to ease the tension gripping them all. The Zarvan ship hovered near the cave entrance, now partially repaired and capable of limited movement. Manali would remain aboard, coordinating their efforts and monitoring the squid colony's movements. Zeke wore a makeshift diving suit, his own equipment supplemented with Zarvan breathing apparatus and lighting technology. Renak was fully encased in Zarvan protective gear, looking more like a space explorer than an ocean diver. Remember, Zeke instructed as they prepared to enter the water, move slowly, control your breathing, and stay close. If we get separated, head for the surface immediately. Renak nodded, his expression hidden behind his helmet, but his anxiety evident in the tense set of his shoulders. They slipped beneath the surface, descending into azure depths that gradually darkened as they approached the cave entrance. The underwater passage appeared as a gaping maw in the rock face, darkness spilling from it like something tangible. Zeke activated his light, the advanced Zarvan technology cutting through the gloom more effectively than any human diving lamp. What it revealed sent a chill through him despite the insulation of his suit. The cave walls were lined with massive egg sacs, each the size of a small car, pulsing with the promise of new predators. Through the specialized communication system in their helmets, Zeke heard Renak's sharp intake of breath. "There are hundreds of them," the commander whispered, as though the creatures might hear. "An entire breeding ground. We need to place the disruptors at strategic points," Zeke reminded him, forcing his own fear down. According to Manali's scan, the main chamber is just ahead. They swam deeper, navigating twisting passages that opened suddenly into a vast underwater cathedral. And there, suspended in the center like some primordial god, was a creature they had faced during the storm. The giant squid, now surrounded by smaller but still massive members of its species. Its colossal body pulsed with bioluminescence, patterns of light rippling across its skin in what seemed almost like language. One enormous eye swiveled toward the intruders, registering their presence with cold, alien intelligence. "Don't move, Zeke," instructed, freezing in place. They track motion. Renak complied, though Zeke could hear his panicked breathing through the communication link. The squid continued to watch them, but made no immediate move to attack. With exquisite slowness, Zeke reached for the first disruptor device attached to his belt. The plan was to place 5 of them throughout the cave system, creating a network that would generate the repelling frequency. As he began to move toward the first installation point, the giant squid's tentacles undulated, but remained stationary. Encouraged, Zeke secured the first device to the cave wall, activating its passive mode. "One down," he whispered to Renak. 4 to go. They moved to the second location, tension building with each passing moment. Renak placed the second disruptor, his movements becoming more confident as he overcame his initial terror. It was when they attempted to reach the third location that everything went wrong. A smaller squid, perhaps 15 feet in length, darted from a side passage directly into their path. Renak jerked backward in surprise, his sudden movement triggering a chain reaction. The chamber erupted into chaos. The giant squid launched itself toward them with shocking speed, tentacles extended like living whips. The smaller squids followed, the water churning with their frenzied movement. "Scatter!" Zeke shouted, pushing Renak toward a narrow crevice as he swam in the opposite direction, drawing the main predator's attention. A tentacle wrapped around Zeke's leg, yanking him backward. He slashed at it with his knife, but another appendage knocked the weapon from his hand. Through the churning water, he saw Renak trapped against the cave wall, frozen in terror as 2 smaller squid approached him. Acting on instinct, Zeke activated the emergency flare attached to his belt. The underwater flare ignited with chemical brightness, temporarily blinding the giant squid. It released him, retreating from the harsh light. Seizing the moment, Zeke swam to Renak, grabbing the paralyzed Zarvan and pulling him toward the passage that would lead to the third disruptor location. "We can't turn back now," he urged. "We have to complete the network." Whether it was Zeke's courage or a simple survival instinct, Renak snapped out of his paralysis. Together, they raced through the passage, the sounds of enraged squid echoing behind them. They placed the third disruptor in a smaller chamber, then the fourth in a narrow tunnel that connected back to the main cavern. Only one remained, the master unit that would synchronize the others and generate the repelling frequency. It has to be placed in the main breeding chamber, Manali's voice informed them through their communication link. The heart of the colony. That's suicide, Renak protested. The entire pod is agitated now. Then we need a diversion, Zeke decided. He handed the master disruptor to Renak. I'll draw them away. You place the final device. No. Renak gripped Zeke's arm. You'll be killed. One of us has to make it back with confirmation that the network is active, Zeke reasoned. You have a ship, a crew. I'm just one fisherman. Before Renak could argue further, Zeke activated his second emergency flare and swam directly into the main chamber, waving the light to attract the squid's attention. The effect was immediate. The creatures converged on the bright intrusion, tentacles reaching for this irritant in their domain. Zeke darted between them, using his knowledge of cephalopod behavior to anticipate their movements, staying just beyond their grasp. Renak, seeing his opportunity, swam to the designated location and attached the master disruptor to the cave ceiling. Device placed, he reported to Manali. Activate now. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low hum began to emanate from the devices, building quickly into a piercing resonance that was felt rather than heard. The effect on the squid was dramatic. They contorted in evident distress, their coordinated movements dissolving into chaotic writhing. The giant squid, seemingly the colony's leader, emitted a sound that reverberated through the water, a high-pitched keen that made both Zeke and Renak wince despite their protective gear. Then, as suddenly as the chaos had begun, the squids retreated. The entire colony began to move away from the source of their discomfort, streaming out of the cave through passages that led to deeper water. It's working, Manali's excited voice confirmed through their communications. The colony is moving. They're heading toward the deep ocean trench, away from coastal waters. Zeke, still dodging the retreating creatures, spotted Renak trapped in a swirling current created by the mass exodus of the giant squid. The commander was being pulled toward a jagged rock formation, his movements hampered by panic. Without hesitation, Zeke propelled himself through the churning water, intercepting Renak's path and grabbing him around the waist. The impact drove them both dangerously close to the rocks, Zeke's leg taking the brunt of the collision. Pain flared through his calf as sharp stone tore through his suit and into flesh. I've got you, Zeke grunted, using his remaining strength to push them both toward the exit tunnel. Blood clouded the water around his injured leg, but the retreating squid were too disoriented by the sonic disruption to notice this typically irresistible lure. Together, they navigated back through the tunnel system, emerging finally into open water where the Zarvan vessel waited. As they were brought aboard through the airlock, Zeke collapsed, his makeshift diving suit now saturated with seawater and blood. Get him to medical, Renak ordered, shedding his own gear with shaking hands. Quickly, hours later, Zeke awoke in what appeared to be an infirmary of sorts. His leg had been treated with technology beyond his understanding, the deep gash now sealed with a translucent material that flexed with his movement but held the wound perfectly closed. Manali stood nearby, monitoring readings on a screen that displayed what Zeke assumed was his vital signs. Welcome back, she said with a smile when she noticed him stirring. You've been unconscious for nearly 6 hours. The squid, Zeke asked, his voice rough. Gone. The disruptor network is functioning perfectly. They've migrated to the deep trench 50 miles offshore. Our tracking shows no signs of them returning to coastal waters. Zeke nodded, satisfaction washing through him. And Renak, shaken, but unharmed, thanks to you. Manali's expression sobered. He's in communication with the High Council now. They're not pleased with how events have unfolded. Before Zeke could ask for clarification, the door slid open to admit Renak. The commander's face was drawn with concern, but he managed a genuine smile at seeing Zeke conscious. The fisherman lives, he said, approaching the bed. How do you feel? Like I've been kicked by a whale, Zeke replied with a weak chuckle. But I'll survive. Renak's smile faded as he exchanged a glance with Minali. Zeke, there's something we need to discuss. The High Council has issued direct orders regarding our interaction with Earth natives. With you, specifically. Zeke tensed, sensing the gravity in Renak's tone. What kind of orders? Minali stepped forward. Standard protocol when indigenous species discover our existence is to eliminate the evidence. In this case, she gestured to a small device on a nearby table that resembled a metallic disc. This would erase your memories of our encounter. You would remember nothing of the last several days. I see. Zeke's voice was flat. He looked between the two aliens, searching their expressions. And is that what you plan to do? Renak picked up a device, turning it over in his hands. It will be the safest option for our people and for you. Knowledge of extraterrestrial contact could make you a target on your world. I saved your lives, Zeke stated simply. I kept your secret. I helped you neutralize a threat to my people and yours. You did, Renak agreed, which is why I find myself reluctant to follow these particular orders. Minali touched Renak's arm. We owe him more than this, Renak. What he did in that cave, facing his own world's monsters to help us, it contradicts everything we've been taught about humans and their relationship with oceans. A tense silence filled the room as Renak deliberated. Finally, he set the memory device down and stepped away from it. The High Council believes that your injuries have resulted in natural memory impairment, he announced formally. Any recollection you might retain would be dismissed as trauma-induced hallucination. That is what my report will state. Zeke let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Thank you. No, Renak shook his head. Thank you, Ezekiel Fisher. You've taught us something our centuries of distant observation never could. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. That evening, as repairs on both vessels neared completion, the three gathered once more on the shore. The wind chime had been meticulously restored, its damaged planking replaced with a material that looked like wood, but Zeke suspected was considerably stronger. Your vessel has been enhanced, Minali explained as Zeke ran his hand along the seamless repair. The hull is now reinforced with a microscopic layer of Zarvan composite. It will withstand impacts that would shatter ordinary wood and resist water penetration for decades. A parting gift, Renak added. We leave at dawn. Zeke nodded, a complicated mix of emotions washing through him. Part of him would miss these strange visitors, while another part looked forward to returning to the simple rhythms of his life at sea. What will you tell your council? He asked Renak. About Earth's oceans. The commander looked out over the bay, now peaceful in the fading light. The truth, that they are as dangerous as we feared, but that the creatures who navigate them are more remarkable than we ever imagined. As night fell, they shared a final meal together. Stories were exchanged, quiet laughter rose to mingle with the smoke of their small fire, and an unlikely friendship was cemented beneath alien stars. Morning arrived with clear skies and gentle waves. The Zarvan ship, fully repaired, hovered just beneath the surface of the bay, ready for departure. Renak and Minali stood on the shore with Zeke, their final farewells tinged with both sadness and hope. Will you return? Zeke asked, already knowing the answer. Not to these waters, Minali replied. The council has declared this region off limits for direct study. But perhaps someday, elsewhere, if you see lights in the sky instead of beneath the waves, look up and wave, Renak suggested with a smile. It might be us checking on our friend. With final handshakes, a human custom they had adopted, Renak and Minali boarded their small transport craft and disappeared beneath the surface. Minutes later, Zeke caught a glimpse of something massive rising from the depths further out, breaking the surface momentarily before ascending into the clear blue sky at impossible speed. Then they were gone, leaving behind only ripples that quickly faded. Weeks passed, and life in the fishing village gradually returned to normal. Reports of missing boats ceased, and the strange lights that had been spotted offshore no longer appeared. If anyone noticed that Ezekiel Fisher's ancient boat now weathered storms with unexpected resilience, or that the old fisherman sometimes gazed skyward with a knowing smile, they didn't mention it. Zeke kept his promise of silence. What would be the point of speaking out? Who would believe that aliens existed and feared Earth's oceans? Who would accept that a simple fisherman had taught these advanced beings a lesson about courage? One clear night, as Zeke sat aboard the wind chime miles from shore, a shooting star blazed across the heavens. It paused briefly in its trajectory, pulsing with a familiar blue light before continuing on its journey. Zeke raised his hand in greeting, knowing it was almost certainly his imagination, but hoping nonetheless that somewhere beyond Earth's atmosphere, Renak stood at a viewing portal, watching the vast oceans of this small blue planet with newfound respect. Aboard the Zarvan vessel departing the solar system, Renak did indeed stand before a viewing screen, Earth's oceans filling the display. Beside him, Manali worked at a console, finalizing their research data for presentation to the High Council. "What do you think they'll make of our report?" she asked, glancing up from her work. Renak considered the question, remembering the feel of ocean water engulfing him, the terror and exhilaration of facing the giant squid, and the courage of one human who had changed his perception forever. "I think," he said slowly, "that they will need to reconsider much of what we thought we knew about Earth, its oceans, and especially its people." He touched a control, zooming the image to focus on the small northern coastline where they had spent those eventful days. Somewhere down there, a fisherman named Zeke continued his solitary journey across waters the Zarvan had always deemed unconquerable. "Perhaps," Renak mused, "it is not the ocean one must master, but oneself." Manali smiled, understanding the profound shift in her commander's thinking. "Do you think we'll ever truly conquer our fear of the deep, as humans have?" Renak watched as Earth diminished to a blue pearl against the blackness of space. "I don't know," he admitted, "but thanks to one fisherman, I believe it's possible. And that is more hope than our people have had in generations."